The strangest gig I ever played began with an email from my drummer friend Paul.
You've got mail.
He said he knew I mainly played guitar, but was wondering if I'd sit in on bass for just one show, and we'd only have to play 8 songs. Oh, and it paid $400 each. At that point, I was making an average of about $100 a show, and that was for playing for 3 hours usually, so it sounded almost too good to be true to me. He mentioned the band director's name, but I didn't recognize it. And then he added that the guy was the keyboardist for a very famous singer, who I won't name here, but I'll just say that she was a Grammy Award-winning singer. I ended up accepting the gig, but with a little bit of apprehension because it had been a long time since I rocked the 4-string at a gig, and now I was going to be playing bass for some world-renowned musician. So Paul sent me the set list and I began practicing that very night. Usually for gigs like this, we just show up and play because we're all working musicians, but the director required us to have at least one rehearsal. So I show up at this practice space and the first thing he does is hands out individual sheet music, and my heart almost stopped. Yeah, I can read guitar music just fine, but it had been over a decade since I had to read any bass clef, let alone practically sight read it in front of a professional. And so as my friend Paul set up his drums, I frantically flipped through the sheet music trying to get my bass clef reading chops back as fast as possible. The flop sweat was already beginning to flow, and I felt like they had just cranked up the heat in the room by 10 degrees. We mostly played older funky tunes by artists like Earth, Wind & Fire and Stevie Wonder, and while the rest of the band was smiling and just grooving out, I, who was the bass player and I should have been grooving the hardest, was still in a panic, just trying to get the majority of the notes right. I felt a little like Lucille Ball at the chocolate conveyor belt machine in I Love Lucy. Sorry, some of you guys might be a little too young to catch that reference. Then something occurred to me. I had 2 choices. So I could either keep struggling and probably get kicked off the gig, or I could fake my way through it, hoping that the director didn't know the bass lines verbatim. So I just took my chances and chose the second option. I ended up relaxing and I made up bass lines following mostly the chords that were on the sheet music and Paul's tight drum grooves. I peeked up from behind the sheet music at the director, afraid he'd be giving me some nasty side eye or something, but his head was actually bobbing up and down like he was finally getting into the groove. So I was pretty relieved, but I swore to myself that I'd spend the rest of the days leading up to the actual gig doing some serious bass reading homework. There was still no mention of the specific nature of the gig. I just thought it was some sort of charity event or something. But when we arrived at the venue, it felt overly professional, very well planned out, and pretty ritzy actually. Way more than any charity event I'd ever been to. Name cards on the tables, catering, doormen, and a gigantic stage with full lighting and PA. It was then that I learned that we were actually playing a fundraiser for a very large and influential religious group. I won't mention them by name, but many big-name celebrities are a part of it. I began to wonder what I really signed up for. So I lugged my bass rig on the stage and plugged in, and I realized that setting up for a bass gig was way easier than a guitar gig. You just plugged in like 2 things and you were ready to go. I loved it because I could feel the whole stage vibrate when I plucked my E string, and I just love those big sound systems whenever you get to play on them. Not only can you hear yourself and everyone in the band crystal clear, but you can also feel the bass guitar and kick drum vibrating your whole body, really connecting you to the music. So the rest of the band finished setting up and we ran through the entire set. I mean, there was only 8 songs after all. And when everyone was satisfied, we retired backstage to the green room area to wait for showtime. The news was on in the room, and they were reporting that this massive ice storm was heading our way, but wouldn't reach us till about midnight. Since showtime was at about 8 p.m., I was pretty confident that we could play, quickly tear down, and be home safe way before the storm even got close. So I raised my bottle of water. We weren't allowed to drink booze at this gig. And I raised my bottle of water to the band and said, "Here's to high-paying 30-minute gigs." And they all raised their bottles too, and we drank and laughed. I will say this about these devoted religious people. They really got into the music. Remember, I was used to playing 3-hour bar shows where people just wanted to hear songs like Sweet Home Alabama and Mustang Sally, and if you ended up playing something they didn't really know or like, they would just go to the bar and drink until you finally did play something they liked. These people, though, smiled and clapped along, mostly on the wrong beats, but at least they were getting way into it. And their faces and their bright eyes really expressed pure joy at the music we were playing. It was like we could do no wrong. And after every song, we received this stadium-like applause. It was so crazy. So I mean, the actual performance went really well, unforgettably well, and we were all satisfied and energized, but I was still thinking about that approaching ice storm. I went to unplug my gear when all of a sudden this guy runs onto the stage and grabs the microphone. "Give it up for the band, everyone." We took a quick bow as a band, and then were quickly rushed off the stage before I could even put the bass into its case. It's okay, I thought. I'll just wait till he's done talking and then I'll pack up and hit the road. Well, that never happened. He ended up being the MC of the fundraiser, and the show was so meticulously planned out that there were no gaps between the speakers or the presentations. So 9 o'clock became 10 o'clock, which became 11 o'clock, and I began to feel panicky about beating this storm. I swear this one Edward Norton-looking dude who was speaker, he must have talked for 45 minutes straight about the future plans of the organization, and he was making very aggressive and peculiar motions with his arms, it was kind of scary, as he proclaimed a bright future if they met their fundraising goals that night. People in the audience just kept pledging their money, it was wild. Well, I had had enough. And when they dimmed the lights to show a video, I thought it was my only chance to escape. And I couldn't go on the stage since everybody's eyes were watching the video screen, which was directly behind the drum kit. But I thought if I just snuck behind the curtain behind the stage, maybe I could reach out, grab my bass rig, and drag it off so slow that no one would notice. It was like a scene from a comedy film or something. This random arm just reaches out from behind the curtain, and then the bass amp just starts getting pulled backwards. It's probably as funny as you can imagine in your mind. Well, it took about 10 minutes for my covert operation to be successful. However, by the time I had pulled all my gear off the stage, it was already midnight, and we could all hear the ice beginning to pelt the windows. Not a good sign. It took another 15 minutes to pack all the gear up, move it all the way down these endless back hallways of this building, and finally into the car. I wished my bandmates the best and told them all to drive slowly. It was looking really bad. Not only was ice falling, cold rain as well, and it seemed to freeze as soon as they hit the ground. And if that wasn't enough, I actually saw some lightning too, and I was thinking, is this even possible? So now it's about 1 a.m., and I'm driving with a car full of gear about 5 miles an hour down some back roads. It was too crazy to get to the main roads. But growing up in Minnesota, I was used to some pretty hairy driving situations, but this stuff was next level. There was literally zero traction. At one point, I was bouncing from curb to curb like a puck on the ice. I knew there was no way I was getting home. Somehow, though, I managed to go a few extra blocks when my car slid partway into the back parking lot of a Wells Fargo. I had to actually abandon my vehicle with all the gear in it and try to find a place to stay until the storm blew over. Back then, I only had a flip phone.
Hello, Moto.
So I couldn't easily book a hotel room, and calling a cab was out of the question because of the bad driving conditions. So I walked about 6 blocks in the freezing downpour, stopping under every awning I could find for some relief from the rain and the ice. I eventually resigned to the fact that I was probably going to have to hide in a gas station bathroom or a sheltered bus stop until morning. So I was really relieved when I actually saw a hotel up ahead. It wasn't some Holiday Inn either. This place looked fancy. It was probably pretty spendy. That is, if I could get in at all at this late hour. My only hope was that somebody canceled and I could get a last-minute room, hopefully on the cheap. Well, I walked into the lobby, straight into a disaster movie scene. Stranded people filled the area, most likely in the same situation I was in. Luckily, though, they were mostly standing in there to escape the cold downpour, whereas I actually wanted a room. When the lady said $249, I gladly handed over my credit card, knowing it was over half of what I made playing that gig, but was well worth it under these desperate circumstances. Well, I had nothing packed, no food, no booze, which actually would have been a nice way to ease my frozen nerves, and I had a dying flip phone. I think it was on 10% or something. Knowing I couldn't fall asleep because I had my contact lenses in my eyes and I didn't have a case or any contact solution with me, I just laid on the bed and watched the only free movie that happened to be on the television, which was Dirty Harry, starring Clint Eastwood. And yes, Clint Eastwood, I was feeling lucky. Lucky to be in a warm hotel room after that crazy night I was having. Hours passed and I finally heard some trucks zooming around, salting the roads, and by about 5 a.m., I figured I should at least try to go move my car because it was still half in the parking lot at Wells Fargo and half in the road, and I didn't want to get towed. But at least it was Sunday morning, so chances were that there weren't any bank employees coming in to call a tow truck on me. I made the 6-block walk back and was so glad to see my poor frozen Saturn car sitting there. It took a few turns of the key and a few pumps of the gas pedal, but the car finally started. Once I started moving, instead of just trying to move my car to a safer location, I decided to just try to go home. And I did, but I ended up going about 20 miles an hour the whole way, and it took over an hour. Somehow I made it. I was so tired, so exhausted, so it was such a relief to actually get home. And I went to bed right away. And when I woke up, I called my friend Paul, and I expected him to have a similar story as I had, but he actually said, "Nah, it wasn't so bad. It took me about an extra 10 minutes to get home." That still baffles me to this day. And that's the story of the strangest gig I've ever played. See ya.